IoT Unplugged, where we talk to industry leaders, innovators, and major players in the Internet of Things, bringing you the best and latest insights. Tune in to learn more. In this episode, I have the pleasure of talking to Brian Bishop, President of the Open Connectivity Foundation, about the importance of collaboration, setting standards, and the OCF's work. Hi, Brian. Thank you for joining me today here at IoT Unplugged.
Good morning. Pleased to meet you.
Could you start us off by introducing yourself and talking a little bit about your role at the Open Connectivity Foundation?
Yeah, sure. My interest in OCF started with research that I was doing for my own company, which is a company called Data People Connected. We've been carrying out research on smart cities for a number of years, and we were specifically looking at, how open standards can benefit the development of smart cities as a whole. And essentially, there are a number of layers within the building blocks to create smart cities. One of them is around data management and data acquisition and data transmission, and hence why I was very interested in the work that OCF was doing. When I reviewed, that particular work, it became very apparent to me that this was a standard that had significant relevance to our own research, but also what we believed were the building blocks for smart cities, because we'd done a lot of work around other standards or supposed standards, and OCF was by far more mature than anything else we'd seen, and the sort of integrity around the standard was being maintained by the membership. So I joined OCF and started to get more involved in the working groups, at which point one of the first working groups I got involved in was strategy, and also the commercial buildings strategy work groups, because again, I felt that OCF had a major part to play in the development of national cyber physical infrastructure. And over the course of time, the work I'd been doing on smart cities became more integral into the strategy movement for OCF, to which point I actually became chair of that strategy group when the previous chair stepped down. And again, about six months later, I was then invited to join the board of OCF, which I was extremely honoured to participate in, and that then resulted within a few months for me becoming president of OCF. And I think that was really mainly down to the fact that OCF over the years previously had focused more on the technical side of things, and there wasn't a clear sort of pathway to how the membership could effectively commercialise the thinking behind what OCF had done. And what I brought to the table, I guess, was this realisation that OCF really fitted into the smart city space and essentially what we call the digital twin space. And that's the path that I'm trying to lead OCF down at this moment in time.
And how have you found being president?
It's difficult. It's we have a very strong membership globally, and what I found was there was still a slight disconnect between work that was going on, say, like in South Korea and in India, in China, etc. And what I wanted to try and do was just bring together the specific forums that had been set up within those areas and regions, and try and get some clear focus on what we needed to do to make sure that OCF, was front and center of the minds of government bodies. And I think through the support that we've had with our PR agency, ICPR, we started to develop a plan around how we communicate that. And we've written a number of white papers, to that end. And more importantly as well, we've been liaising with our membership through our newsletters to explain why we believe that the membership be part of that ecosystem rather than thinking about how they can work with the more larger corporates. There was a clear pathway for them to become autonomous in their own right in the way they do develop products and services within the smart city space.
That's very interesting. Thank you for that, Brian. You touched upon it earlier, looking at standards, but could you just provide an overview of the history of the Open Connectivity Foundation and what kind of standards are you looking at?
Well, obviously, OCF is in its own right an ISO approved standard. We've been working on that since 2015. It is iterative. It's over the course of time, it's always being improved. I believe it's the only ISO approved standard that meets the majority of the security baselines for IoT, and therefore by default is far more mature than most. We have a very solid background in the development of standards through the membership. With particular focus on the security components for all of this. And there's some excellent work that's been carried out by the likes of Wouter van der Beek and Clark Stevens, Alex Wright, and the teams, to focus on making sure that not only are we sort of agnostic to the security elements for the likes of Europe and for the US and for the Far East. We're also committed to being agnostic about how we work with other standards bodies. So I think that really reflects the work that we've been doing with the likes of Matter in recent times. Because again, if you're going to be an open standard, you need to make sure that you're not sort of try and push membership and our services down a particular proprietary roadmap. So that for me is hugely important, and why for me OCF is the right standard for national cyber physical infrastructure.
We will touch upon the Matters standard in a little while, but something I thought you said that was really interesting was talking about this disconnect in the work different companies are doing around the world. Do you think that's still quite a big barrier that, companies and countries are approaching standards very differently and there isn't a cohesion there?
Yes, that's from a personal point of view, yes. So for instance, here in the UK, the National Cyber Physical Infrastructure Strategy Forum, is focused on, the utilization of open standards. But history tells us that most governments are more resistant to trying to push a particular standard and allows the marketplace to dictate how that is. So from my perspective, it's the wrong strategy, because when we're trying to develop highly secure national infrastructure, I think it's my own opinion that governments need to focus on a standard that delivers the tools for the supply chains to build upon, and that then creates, the sort of standard approaches the way we deliver services and products. It's not trying to dictate what should happen, but it's actually a support mechanism for supply chains, because what we can't afford to do is just have a standard that has been written in a way that supports the larger corporations. And I think really that's why within OCF, our focus has been across the whole ecosystem, where a small company, say in India, you can develop a single piece of technology that is OCF compliant, that is certified, that is trusted, can move into a marketplace as well as the major corporations that, are also members, when we're not trying to follow or be dictated to that sort of, corporation mentality. And I think that really also allows countries to save money and to build new supply chains, and to create resilience across supply chains. So yeah, I think the disconnect was really about the membership believing that they had to follow a corporate roadmap. And I've been trying to articulate to them that actually there is a different way of doing this, and I think there has been a response to that in terms of we are now seeing members start to build things with confidence that actually there is you know, a product that they can deliver that meets specific challenges across a national cyber physical infrastructure vertical. And I think that's really encouraging because what that does is it generates growth, economic growth, but also social growth.
Okay, great. So moving on to the Matter standard is probably arguably one of the more well-known standards when we look at smart cities and smart homes. Just to start us off, could you provide an overview of this standard and talk about how it came about?
Again, obviously, we're not part of that sort of particular standard and how that was delivered. You know, it is a standard that is defined in terms of what the what the network that is building it wants from it. We don't see Matter as any form of competitor. It's more of a potential partnership because, as I said before, if you're going to develop a national cyber physical infrastructure strategy, it needs to be a collaborative approach. And the government may want to consider, thinking about, well, okay, if, Matter is dominating in the smart home space, you know, is there a potential then that, the likes of OCF and other standards such as Global Platform, Trusted Connectivity Alliance, HCA, can these all join up together to actually form a single, approach to how we build things, going forward? So, I can't, you know, discuss how Matter have got to where they are. All I can talk about is why we at OCF believe that the development of a bridge, with Matter facilitates an ability to be collaborative, whereby, again, for instance, if you want devices that within the residential space to talk to devices in the infrastructure space, then that is now facilitated. And what you've got now is a data model architecture, an integration architecture, a transmission architecture now that is consistent, that then governments can trust data coming from, devices within that area. And I would also add that, OCF is an ISO approved standard. I'm not quite certain, I may be wrong, but I don't believe that Matter is, as of yet, a fully approved ISO standard.
But based on the messaging you're putting out here, it's not so much competing between standards, but encouraging collaboration. Because when you're looking at making a smart city, there is a huge amount of work involved. So it kind of benefits you to work together rather than to compete with one another.
Yeah, there should be no competition in the space. What we should be doing is, by definition, standards should be there to benefit people, the environment. It shouldn't be a competitive tool, to allow larger organizations just to push their product and services. It should be something that is collaborative. And I think, that's why, I believe OCF, is fit for purpose in this space, is because we're not trying to do that. It's a not-for-profit organization. We're trying to be supportive of our membership, and we're always learning. And we will learn more as and when, the sort of smart city, national cyber physical infrastructure strategies start to develop more. Because this really is, and it's been the failure of smart cities for many, many, many years, in that, the data sharing infrastructure is not being delivered. It's poor in its conception because, with the smart city space was all about products, things that were smart, and that's fine. But if you can't share the data for a common purpose, i.e., to the benefit of the environment, for the benefit of, people, and cities as a whole, then, it just becomes a product. It's not smart anymore. So I think, what we've been trying to do at OCF is showcase, how to develop that sort of strategy around data sharing infrastructure as well as smart infrastructure.
So, in your opinion, I think you were sort of alluding to it in this message about data sharing, but in your opinion, what needs to change for a smart city to be truly smart or to continue the development towards this goal?
So we've been working very closely here in the UK with the Digital Twin Hub and the Connected Places Catapult on the development of a framework, to do this. So it's a framework or architecture that looks at the different layers. So similar to the OSI model and the likes of the Abashi frameworks. You've effectively need to think about your data management layer first. So what data models are we going to use? What ontologies, what semantic interfaces are we going to use? And then how do we then, once we've got consistency around those data models, how we build those into, hardware, software, how then do we then transmit that from one place to another? So we effectively creating a secure data pipeline that is developing trust all the way up the layer. So effectively, we are preparing the data to enable trust. Okay, and then from trust, we're able to then share, because a lot of people, and this could be within government, it could be in society as a whole, do not know the difference between data and information. And information defines the data requirements, but we have to trust the data to create true information to deliver insight. And that's what we've been doing, here in the UK. And I have to say, in other countries as well, is they're starting to move towards this, data model or data integration schema. And effectively, we're able to then build a label of trust around, devices, that data acquisition layer, certifications, regulations, data map model and mapping and so on and so forth. Once we've got to that, then we can then share data across the whole ecosystem. But again, you have to make sure that when you're doing that, you're abiding by the sort of ethics around the use of data, the control of bias around the use of data, and more importantly, then how we build high quality information management frameworks to enable cities of the future to work together to solve challenges. So, what we're doing now is not just thinking about how we connect devices, at a very micro level. We're thinking of then about how cities share data together to solve societal challenges. And I think that is the sort of, the nexus of where we want to be able to provide, those services, so that, the planet, as a whole and people as a whole benefit from that.
Which I think also goes back to your point around developing the infrastructure to support a smart city so that it isn't just a case of looking at how you make a street light smart, for instance. I
Yeah.
think that relates well to that.
Yeah, I think there's going to be a significant change in the way we view data and how we procure things going forward. Because, if you use the street light as an example, um, a street light is no longer a street light. It's just a data center. Because, you can create highly secure mesh networks through a street light, but it can also have other infrastructure on there, such as different types of sensors. Okay. And if the organization that owns that asset, that is the street light, they want to make sure that they own that data, because they've paid for that, that capability, but they will want to then share that data with those organizations that are providing services to it. So effectively now when you procure a street light, you have to make sure that you are within the specification of the procurement is that you own the data to that asset, but you will share it for a purpose. So effectively you have to then create very strong access controls to just a simple streetlight. And again, that's where OCF is well defined in how to deliver those certain things.
One topic that's quite frequently spoken about now in relation to data, but also in relation to smart city development, is the security part of this. And you briefly mentioned it earlier, and I thought it'd be great to get your thoughts on how you make sure this data and information you're talking about is secure in the first place.
Well, absolutely. As I say, again, in our humble opinion, OCF meets, I believe, more than 95% of every security baseline right across the world. It isn't just specific to one's region as a whole. You know, we think about security and we think about trust, and nothing can ever be trusted. We have to believe that it is going to be trustworthy because security is always evolving. Okay, but as a standards body, that's our role to make sure that we make something as secure as we possibly can, and an OCF is by far and away a highly secure standard. And I think that really sits well in terms of how it fits into national cyber physical infrastructure. But our ambitions, are to collaborate. To collaborate more with academia, because again, that's a slight frustration on my part that academia is actually so far behind in this space. I've spoken a lot to universities, and they weren't even aware of not just OCF, but the likes of Matter and some of these other standards that are ongoing. So we have this capability to work with academia to effectively penetrate test everything that we do all the time, so that we're always, evolving, from a security perspective. And that allows countries around the world who have aspirations to be smart cities to work and collaborate on that whole basis. Because as you start to develop the challenge areas, part of that, proposal will be to always look at security. And security is defined in different ways because you have varying degrees of sensitivity of data. Okay, so effectively, you're not just building security, you're building the governance and provenance models around data. You're building the sort of data sharing pathways relevant to, the governance model that you've defined for data. So it's a much more holistic picture that you have to, think about, but it has to all be done at the same time. What I've seen over the these last few years, certainly with COVID, where you react to things. So you can build technology to solve a specific challenge to provide data, but security was always an afterthought. Why? Because it would have delayed things. Okay, but you can still learn from what you've done previously and then effectively embed the security, you know, afterwards, because it was, it was a situation that none of us, effectively foresaw. But right now, we are working on, you know, the components needed to deliver a highly secure model for such things as, virtual wards, domiciliary care, and so on and so forth.
Do you still see security being an afterthought, or do you think the mindset around it is changing?
It's never been an afterthought with OCF. It's actually always been at the forefront. Okay, but as mentioned before, um, a lot of organisations were not aware enough of what OCF, was able to deliver. And that's the messaging that I've been trying to, bring forth over these last couple of years, is that we have a standard already developed, highly mature. Okay, you can use it. It can provide the tools for SMEs all around the world to build products and services, that meet the requirements of governments who are developing smart city strategies. So it's there. Why make something up, or make something new when something already exists? And as an organization, we're not here to create commercial benefit. It's a standard that is truly open. And that, I think that for me is what we're trying to achieve. Why we're speaking to organizations like yourselves. Through the great work that we're doing with our PR agencies. You know, the work that I'm also doing across the world, to speaking with relevant governments about these particular opportunities as well. It's a collaboration tool that they can use.
On that note, Brian, do you have any final comments or closing thoughts for our listeners?
Again, get in touch. I think, from my perspective, we're trying to build a marketplace of companies that can help, cities around the world. We've been in discussions with the likes of the United Nations habitat programs, where you can effectively build things that has a label of trust, because, you know, we've got to think about as well how we support, the sort of capability and capacity problem, that governments around the world has. So people within procurement don't understand the technical aspects of this. They just want to know, does it work? Okay. Can I trust it? Okay. Then I'll buy it. Okay. And I think from here on in, what we're able to do is if we can start to develop that sort of marketplace scenario, then cities around the world can so go, right, okay, I can now trust that center to monitor this, and it is highly secure. Okay. That opens up so many opportunities for businesses around the world. And I think that really is an important aspect to all of this. You can build capability and capacity in your own country, because we're going to provide the tools for you to be able to do that. The thinking and everything like that comes with through cities working together. But actually the opportunities for local businesses to deliver on these things is enormous.
Well, that is a very good note to end on. So thank you, Brian, for your time today. I really do appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thank you.
IoT Unplugged.